Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Gawkner. This is Both Sides of the Aisle, and I'm excited to have a conversation today with Shireen Gorbani on the left.
Hello, and hey, listeners, especially Ben, who sent us quite the email.
I love it. And another conversation with my friend on the right, John Dougal.
Good to see you. Great to be with you guys.
Yeah, excited to talk. It sounds like I have some enthusiasm in my voice.
Happy historical week, Independence Day, all that.
Yeah,
you know?
maybe that's why I have that energy, but there's a lot of, unsettling
the original No
things
King's Day.
going on.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't like the heat, just starting in a funny place there, but July is probably my least favorite month of the year, with one exception. I love the 4th of July, and I don't mind the 24th either.
You
but I don't like the
mind
heat.
the 24th. Come on. July's
but I
a great
love
month.
I'm a Murray resident, and we celebrate the 4th of July big time. We have a parade. We have our park that just hosts. We have a car show, a chalk art show, a patriotic sermon, flyovers.
We got it
got
all.
Baseball games. So
I actually think if you're in the Valley and you want one of the ideal, you want to hit them all. My favorite parade is Magna, actually. It's a wild time. It's a great time. Followed by the Murray one is so charming. Not on State Street. That sucks. It's hot. But as soon as it turns into the neighborhood and goes into the park, it's one of the most charming in the Valley.
This is Vine Street. It turns on State and goes up Vine. That's where I'll be.
That's great. And then the next one that I think is actually a little bit of a sneaker, a surprise hit for me is Sandy. And they do, well, I don't know if this is what they always do, but theirs is in the evening. And when I was down there last, they have like a music performance in the park. It's really nice. It's really charming.
Nice.
Those are some of my favorites.
Just because you don't hang out in Provo enough?
Yeah, I don't know.
And I can remember sleeping overnight.
Provo's the big parade.
That's the big
Provost's
one.
the
I
big
can
one.
remember being a student and doing all that.
I like Murray because it's small enough to have that quaintness, but it's large enough to get the big, the governor comes and the congressional delegation comes. So it all works.
And Natalie comes.
And Natalie's there.
I mean, let's talk about the important people there.
Yeah,
Murray.
but going globally, leaving Murray, Utah, leaving the state, leaving the country. What do you guys want to talk about in the leaked reports about the U.S. bombs that went into Iran and tried to destroy the nuclear program? I've been reading all the different reports on this, and what strikes me is that nobody really knows.
They're classified reports for one. Two, the destruction is underground, so we're not really ever going to truly know.
And you don't know
all
if
going
they
to depend
moved
on
it.
how Iran reacts. That's what's going to say what happens, is how they react and how they respond and in what period of time.
I like your angle.
That's going to be the telling
And
factors.
I think what's important for people to understand is I think there's a sense now that this administration has sort of done this without consequence. And that is not how the Middle East works. So
that's a warning to everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a much longer timeline. It is, I think we should all just be prepared that the outcomes of this kind of international engagement often finds its way back to us and often takes a very long time.
I read the lead opinion piece in The Week magazine. I think it was by William Falk this month, but he essentially says that, Shireen. He says, these aren't his words, but the way I remember the term sleeper cells. And he's reminding us of people in this country that want to do harm to this country that just got a ton of ammunition to go big. Yeah. And
But if that's the case, that will also feed into the narrative and the reaction in regards to immigration in our country as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it will. Well, so internationally, we also have Canada that scrapped their tax on big tech companies after another threatened tariff increase. This is just becoming almost like a yo-yo where the president has something, then does something else, then something, then does something else. Countries react. I've called it a summer of uncertainty.
Yeah.
But where does it lead?
Yeah, where does it lead? So
Not sure.
I was going to say, I think as the economist, Natalie, you're probably better to speak to this than either of us. No offense, John, but
none taken.
I think what we see, right, is increased destabilization in the markets. It's difficult for businesses to make decisions. It's hard to know where to invest or how to expand or contract. And I guess I'll just add on to this. We got not a great jobs report. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of economic decline that we're starting to see. And I think it's driven by the inconsistency of this president.
Yeah, John, sometimes they use the term economic gravity and political gravity. So this idea that Political gravity, it's the idea that there's these forces that you can't control and they're given and that you can't really fight them. But political gravity, some people say you can fight, but economic gravity will get you every time. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I've never heard those terms, but I've always talked about businesses are used to and have to deal with economic uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
But when you mix in the political uncertainty, this is the thing that they really hate because it can whipsaw them even more than what they were trying to predict and go. And so that's, and what so many people don't understand is you can't just snap your finger and say, okay, this is a favorable business climate and people will invest to build buildings and to deploy major infrastructure to support economic activity can oftentimes take years. And so you can't just look and say, okay, what is it today? You're trying to predict what is the political and economic environment going to be like years in the future? And am I going to be able to expense these costs and all that? And then when you see this whipsawing back and forth, some folks are like, well, right now it's more favorable. They should be investing. But they're looking going, okay, this president's for a few years and then I get a new president and new administration. And all of a sudden, what if that goes the other way and it's not worth, if you're going to do a gas refinery and you got to have a 40-year payout for this, investing, billions of dollars today for, I don't know if I'm going to get a 40-year payout
stops the investment.
Stops you from investing.
Yeah. Well, so all the big news has been on what I'll call OB3. What is it? One big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, I guess.
And I'm going to compliment the Republicans for at least, as we're recording this, it's passed the House, passed the Senate, and back to the House, not passed the House the second time.
Correct.
But I'm going to compliment the Republicans for actually getting it passed through two bodies, even in little different forms. I didn't think they'd get this done till mid to late August. And it looks like they're going to get it this week, but that could still change.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the House does.
Yeah.
I know the president wants it by Independence Day, July 4th.
Your short summary, Shireen, and I'll ask you to do the same, John, and then I'll weigh in.
So my short summary is this is the greatest transfer of wealth that we have ever seen in this country from poor and working class Americans to the wealthy. And it explodes ICE's budget. So if you're concerned about people being snatched by often unmarked, unbadged individuals across even our own communities here in Utah, if you're concerned about that, their budget increases by 20-fold. So a lot. When we think about the impacts on things like SNAP, so hungry families in our country, they are being sold out to fund tax cuts for billionaires. We also know that I think it's 2 in every 5 births in this country are covered by Medicaid. These are individuals at risk. We're talking about 17 million people losing access to health care and additional people finding new costs when they show up at a doctor's appointment, when they go to purchase health care on the marketplace. This is going to be, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say rural hospitals are going to be strained immensely, if not close. We may see that in our own state. And we're seeing major impacts and concern for me around nursing homes. Medicaid provides long-term care. So Medicare, right, covers folks' medical, like if a doctor comes to see you, you've got, treatment. But long-term care in this country is backfilled by Medicaid. And that is also on the chopping block here. So there are many ways in which the average listener to this, your neighbors, the folks that you spend your time with, will be harmed.
Yeah. John, you can take it wherever you want, but the portrait that Shireen paints there leads you to believe that there'll be political price to pay for all of that. Comment on that. If you go after elderly in this country, you usually pay a price. They have high voter participation.
Let's just also add that it increases the debt ceiling, which should bother someone like you, John, by about $5 trillion.
So this is a big bill. There's some stuff in it that's beautiful, and there's some stuff in it that I don't think is beautiful. There were some aspects, 2017 tax cuts. I come from the perspective that the overwhelming majority of that needed to be extended. It should have been permanent the first time. Unfortunately, they didn't make it permanent. Most of it, they just extended it for a certain period of time. There are certain things that they made permanent, which is dealing with, expensing of business transactions and purchases. Rather than having to expense it over years, you can immediately expense it. I think that's good for the economy. There are other issues like blowing out the debt. I wish they would have done more to rein in spending to bring control on that. Now, I know some people talk about the $3 trillion, deficit blowout or debt blowout, really. Unfortunately, I think that was going to happen either way, because so much of it was being driven by the tax cuts that were going to get extended. And so that's why when there's this debate about, well, does it cost $3 trillion or $500 billion? That's where this nuance comes in is, okay, what is the going assumption? Do you assume that these tax cuts that were going to expire at the end of this year were going to get extended, whether by Republicans or Democrats or both? The overwhelming majority said they were going to extend them. So some were saying that was going to happen, that $3 trillion in debt was going to happen anyway. But from my perspective, to Shereen's point, when you start talking about what political price will be borne, I think it's going to come down to what is the strength of the economy? Do people feel good about their economic situation, or do they feel like there's a severe negative impact? And then how big is the base that feels that impact?
Really nice summaries by both of you. I would just add, what I would love to see is somebody to do some scoring that looks at the whole picture, right? Looks at all of the cuts in federal employment, whether it's USAID, whether it's NOAA, whether it's FEMA, whether it's HHS, and help us understand how this big, beautiful bill with its tax cuts and all of the constraints that are being put on the federal government, how does that shake out? And I think that's some unproven ground that we got to get more information on. And that's to you, Congressman Blake Moore, because you're on Ways and Means, and you could get us that kind of information. I think that would be really helpful for him to do.
I called his office today. They said, we're not sure if he's comfortable. I'm not able to comment on if he's comfortable kicking 17 million Americans off of healthcare. But I want you to know I got right through. So go ahead and call your congressman.
Hey, we're going to take a break. But when we come back, let's just briefly talk about Senator Murkowski and her actions here and just try to wrap it up with that. Does that sound like a good approach?
Sounds good.
All right. Stay tuned. Natalie Gochner with Shereen Gorbani and John Dougal.
You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle on Utah Public Radio. We love to hear from listeners like you. If you would like to send us a comment, email bsotapodcast@gmail.com. That's bsotapodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Shereen Gorbani on the left.
John Dougal on the right.
Natalie Gochner in the Political Center. We are talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill for just a little bit longer, and we want to talk about Senator Murkowski from Alaska, who was the vote that made this happen.
The big, beautiful state.
Yeah, the big, beautiful state, and the vote that took this over the top.
This was 50-50, and the vice president had to come in to break the tie.
Wow. I can't
You had three Republicans
imagine.
that joined the Democrats opposing the bill for various reasons.
I can't imagine the pressure on Senator Murkowski at the very end here. She's
and
saying
she and
publicly,
Trump do not see eye to eye.
Yeah, and she's saying publicly that I did what's best for my constituents, which means that there's some,
I'm looking out for Alaska.
well, there's good things for oil and gas, and that she got some exclusions for some
Social
welfare
safety nets,
programs
yeah.
that help her state. But I can't help. I've had this feeling before. I'll direct it to Shereen, where I've been in a setting where a bunch of men are in the room and they're telling me what to do.
Yeah. You like
Okay,
that?
do you really want to go to Shereen right now, or should you? No,
Well,
I'm
yeah,
just,
have you
I'm
been in
just-
that? Have you been
John,
in that
tell us what it
situation,
feels
Shereen?
like,
Let me just
John.
explain.
Have you been in that situation, Shereen?
I've been in that situation a few times.
Yeah,
trying
I
to
just
be in it
kind of
less.
because there's just something
I'm now
different
in a
about it.
no-win situation.
I know.
I'm sorry to set it
There
up that
is
way, but I
Put me on
can't.
the show. I'll see you guys after we get done.
Well, I
just
can't
really
imagine what that
sincerely-
feels like.
Sincerely, how has it felt?
You feel diminished. You feel undervalued. It feels unfair. It feels familiar.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's difficult about it too, right, is while I think ultimately she knew this is not a good bill,
Mm-hmm.
she was able to leverage a few things to the benefit of her constituents. And I do think that personal, political, gain, security is based on those voters, those Alaska voters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the argument that she can make to them is the most important argument. However, however much heart I might have for the experience that she has been through, I think this was a terrible vote for Americans. May have been okay in the short term for Alaskans.
She said publicly that she hoped that the House made changes and didn't support it. So she made clear that she didn't really agree with the bill.
So I just have to say, and I know that this is no surprise to either of you, but Republicans in Congress, our senators, our representatives, could stop this administration in many ways at any time. They choose not to. Senator Curtis, Senator Lee, who I think we've maybe all anticipated, every single one of our congressional representatives are fine with this, and I don't see big leverage or payouts coming our way.
I'm going to go ahead.
Well, no, it's so fascinating because we're saying Murkowski had leverage, but Curtis had leverage.
Yeah,
Lee
any
had
one of
leverage.
them had leverage. They choose not to use
and
it
in the
to
House,
serve
it's
the president.
not much different. Yeah, go ahead, John.
So this, I mean, to say they were going to fully block this bill, I think meant for many of them they were going to get run over. Just there were many things in here that they thought were really good policy proposals. And in the legislative process, rarely do you have something that you look and go, man, I love that whole thing. It's like, I love this part of the bill. I hate this part of the bill. And so do you look and say, okay, there's more good than bad. And what does it mean to, in Murkowski's condition, Alaska, is it more good than bad for my constituents in Alaska? And I think to a certain extent, she said yes. Now, maybe that was to her constituents as a whole. Maybe that was to her politically, but whatever. She decided that it was more good than bad, and so she voted for it. Okay? But rarely do I see a bill that I look and say, okay, everything's wonderful in there. And it's always a big trade-off, and you're just trying. And so you can negotiate to a certain point.
Eventually.
But there's a point that you have to either buy in and support or oppose. And Rand Paul is one that opposed.
Yeah.
And he was early on what his concerns were about growth of the debt and other aspects like that. Others were concerned on the Republican side that voted no, were concerned about what Shireen was talking about, some of the welfare aspects and the changes and cuts that took place in some of those programs. And so this is a messy process.
Yeah.
And then when you look and say, okay, it's messy in the Senate, it's messy in the House, when you're bringing it all together, plus you got the president and you got kind of a clock ticking. You know?
Yeah.
Artificial.
Yeah.
Imposed.
Well, no, for the tax cuts, everybody felt like it has to get done before the end of the year.
Again, just to make sure billionaires get theirs.
Hey, John.
The
what
average. You talk about billionaires, but who really pays the taxes in America? It's the middle class pays the taxes. That's where the money's really at. And so that's when you're talking about folks. The average Utahn would have seen what, $1,000 or more increase in their federal taxes if that
Many
had not
are
been
still going
extended.
to see. Many are still going to see an increase, especially if they're making below $250,000 a year.
John and Shireen, Elon Musk looms large here. He's fascinating.
This is one of those where he loses me on his message. I mean, I totally support him when he says he's concerned with the blowout of the debt. I'm totally there. But when I look behind the scenes and I say, part of it's about the debt, but part of it's about the energy tax credits
I
that he
know.
wants for his cars.
Yeah,
For
It's
sure.
like you lost me. It's kind of hypocritical.
But
there.
he's talking about a third party, and he could actually take
you
that
could fund
somewhere.
it. Yeah, I think it's hard to know when you're just like doused in ketamine, like what exactly you might do, right? Like it's difficult to.
What is ketamine for the average user? What do you describe that?
Okay, so it's been widely reported that he is using quite a bit of ketamine, and I guess I would describe
Mind-altering drug.
a mind-altering stimulant, and it does feel like, allegedly, it feels like we're on that ride, because every once in a while he kind of comes up and he's like, no, I'm mad about this, and then he sort of goes away. But it is true what you're saying, Natalie, that he could fund it.
Well, I'm just kind of watching, I think it was Face the Nation on Sunday. I know it's State of the Union. But anyway, they had the senator from Massachusetts. Help me with her name, Shireen.
Oh, I don't. Go on.
A woman.
Oh, Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
My girl.
That's okay. It's okay. But they had Senator Warren, and she's saying how much she appreciates Elon Musk, and all of a sudden they're aligned.
Yeah.
And that saying of politics making strange bedfellows. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I look at it and I'm like, there's a lot of people that don't agree with either the Republicans or the Ds.
Yeah.
And then if he doesn't give his money to people
Yep.
and uses it for the middle,
Yeah.
there could be something there.
There could be. I mean, one of the biggest challenges, I think historically, I'm willing to take feedback on this, but with third parties, and I think we saw it in our own state with the Evan McMullen race, right? Is the amount of voter education it takes, the amount of money it takes to reach voters on particular messages about independent, not unaffiliated candidates, and the infrastructure, right? So like knocking doors, like getting out to people. It doesn't exist for third parties. If you have an endless flow of cash, you could see something different.
Yeah. Gardner Institute went public with a report today about land ownership in our state.
Tell us
I
more.
encourage people to go
Tell
check
us
it out.
more.
It's just a straight out data report of land ownership, but shows who has the highest percentage of land owned by the federal government and so on. And it's a story everybody's familiar with. It's about 2/3 of our
You didn't
land.
say whether Mike Lee was right or wrong.
Well, where I'm coming from is that, Mike Lee made a big deal to try to put up for sale portions of federal public land and tried to do it for housing, but then ended up pulling it. and for good reason. The rules made it so he couldn't protect, China, BlackRock, foreign interests from buying these lands. And I totally get what he did. But was this a net win or loss for him, both of you?
This was a net loss.
Yeah.
This is a net loss for him. It was also a net loss for the topic of, because I'm one of those that believes some of that land should be privatized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it even set back, even when you look and say, okay, there's, let's say, a parcel of land that's in the middle of Saratoga Springs that's federally owned that probably should be developed into housing. It even sets back the discussion on that kind of stuff that I think is really obvious.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. And Shireen, I was just stunned at the backlash. It came from everywhere.
Yeah, it came from everywhere.
I thought it might just come from Nature Conservancy District, Audubon Society, the Wilderness Society. It came from MAGA.
It came from MAGA because, again, I'll just add to folks. If you're a hunter, if you're an angler, and you like to be out on our public lands, you think that the dispossession of these lands, the sale of these public lands, means you're going to get to hunt there? You're going to get to fish there? Yeah, absolutely not, right? And I think the same thing, honestly, with ranchers. I feel like I mentioned that briefly recently. If the amount that people pay to graze on BLM land versus what they would pay if that were in private hands would make it impossible for many ranchers to be able to access those lands. I just think that I don't know, this is again where I just go back to, I know it's tough in the state, it's tough in this moment, but when we actually have conversations across demographics, experience, rural, urban versus rural, when I ran for Congress, people said, oh my goodness, you must have heard such different things in places like Escalante versus downtown Salt Lake. And I was like, actually not. A lot of people have the same concerns.
Interesting.
But we don't have leaders that are willing to engage on the sticky questions.
And this is one of those topics where it takes a lot of work to explain to folks in Utah. And when I was state auditor, I talked with my colleagues around the nation, and most of them have never heard of the concept of public lands. They'd never heard what the issues are. So it took a lot of work just to educate them. And I wasn't even trying to, drive some type of policy perspective for them. It was just to educate them on the topic.
Yeah.
And so this is where, Senator Lee would have benefited. It would have taken time rather than trying to parachute it into this quote unquote must pass big, beautiful bill. Try and work and bring the colleagues around so that they're supportive of the issue and understand the issue rather than kind of being surprised by it.
Makes sense. Yeah. I'm a Westerner, and of course, and I remember I used to work in Maine in my summers, and I'd be on an out of camp trip, and I would be in the ocean and come up against an island, and it would have private property on it, and I would be like, "What? That's odd.
Yeah.
You mean I can't dock here?"
Yeah.
Just different to a Westerner. Hey, we got about 3 minutes or so left in the program. Let's talk about Governor Cox and the water year and drought. Governor Cox is calling upon Utahns. He did it last week to have a day of prayer and fasting for rain. 17 of Utah's 29 counties, it's nearly half the state, 46% suffering from drought.
Yeah.
Shireen, I took a tour of Great Salt Lake last week in some airboats, and I was in Farmington Bay, and I didn't have to wear a life preserver because the bay never got deeper than 2 feet. You could be out in the middle of the bay between, let's say, the shoreline in West Bountiful and Antelope Island, and it's 2 feet deep. Wow.
Yeah. So I think we agree that prayer must come with action, and and there's a good.
I think we all agree on that. Sure,
yes. I think there's a good argument to be made that this governor has tried to prioritize funding on water in ways that the moment has not been met by our legislature. And the economic fallout of this lake drying out will be devastating to the state. I don't know how do we convince them? I guess maybe I'll ask you both that. As a person who served in the body, John, what's it going to take to get the legislature to really work on the kind of infrastructure and funding that's needed to address the lake?
So I come from the perspective of the legislature really is a response to the public. They're on a short leash. If they get too far away from the public, they have an end of leash experience. Either something they do gets subject to referendum,
John's saying
or they get voted out.
A parade has already started and they're running to the front.
Yeah. And so really the question is, what can you do to have the public recognize the challenges we're in, the cost of water? And right now we subsidize water. And Wayne Niederhauser and I tried to do market pricing of water, and it did not fly with the public. But if you have to pay the full freight of what that water costs, we're going to be more responsible. Yeah. And we got to move down that path.
Yeah. Well, so how do I respond to that? Yes, get rid of the, incentives to overconsume, to overuse, but also start figuring out that we live in an arid climate and it's worth changing our water behaviors.
I moved here from California, moved to a desert, and people were using water like it's going out of style.
Okay, well, say your prayers, everyone. Great conversation.
And conserve.
And
conserve.
Great to be with Shireen Gurbani and John Dougal. Program's produced by Anthony Skoma. Thanks, everybody, for listening.